In the humid heart of Nigeria, surrounded by dense forests and winding rivers, there once stood a small farming village. It was 1957, and though the world was moving toward modernization, this village lived as if time had slowed. Families woke with the sun, men tended the fields, and women gathered water and prepared meals. Children ran barefoot through narrow paths, their laughter echoing into the trees. Life was simple, predictable, and rooted in tradition. The people here were deeply tied to the land. Every harvest was celebrated with songs and dances passed down through generations. Their ancestors were honored, their gods respected, and their folklore guarded like precious treasure. Outsiders rarely came, and when they did, they often described the village as self-sufficient, peaceful, and untouched by the chaos that swirled in other parts of the country. Then, one night in late August, everything changed. When neighboring communities visited at dawn, they found the village silent. Not a single fire burned in the clay hearths. Pots of food sat abandoned, as though meals had been interrupted. Mats were left unrolled, tools scattered across the fields, and doors hung loosely from their frames. Livestock wandered freely, untethered, while wells remained full of water, untouched. But the people, every man, woman, and child, were gone. There were no signs of violence, no footprints leading out, no tracks of wagons or carts. It was as if hundreds of lives had dissolved into thin air overnight. What was left behind was not the aftermath of battle, nor the evidence of disease. It was something stranger, an entire community erased, yet their daily life frozen in place. The first theories spread quickly. Some whispered of raiders who had forced the villagers to flee, but the absence of destruction argued otherwise. Others suggested disease, but no bodies were found. Instead, a darker belief began to form, that the land itself had swallowed its people. The villagers, it was said, had ignored a sacred warning from their ancestors, and the spirits had come to collect their debt. The mystery deepened when elders from neighboring tribes recalled an ancient legend. It spoke of a restless forest that demanded respect, a place where the living could be pulled into the unseen world if boundaries were crossed. For the first time, the story felt less like myth and more like a chilling possibility. By the end of 1957, colonial administrators and local leaders alike had noted the disappearance but offered no explanation. Official records were thin, often dismissing the matter as migration or abandonment. Yet no evidence of resettlement was ever found. The vanished village became a story whispered around fires, a warning told to children, and a scar on the land that no one dared to rebuild upon. But even as years passed, questions remained. Where had the villagers gone? Why was there no trace of their journey? And what truth lay hidden between folklore and fact? The silence of that empty Years after the disappearance, the empty village remained untouched. Nature began to reclaim it. Vines crawled up the mud walls, roofs collapsed under heavy rains, and pathways were swallowed by tall grass. To outsiders, it looked like a forgotten ruin. But for those who lived in the surrounding regions, it was more than a ruin. It was a wound, and it carried a shadow of fear. Travelers avoided the place, even when passing nearby. Hunters refused to enter the forest trails leading there. Stories grew with each passing year, layered with superstition and unease. Some said they had heard faint singing from the abandoned huts, voices of villagers trapped between worlds. Others swore they had seen ghostly figures moving at the edge of the trees, vanishing when approached. The settlement was no longer seen as part of the earth of the living. It had become a doorway to something else. But curiosity was difficult to silence. In the 1960s, a group of local historians attempted to document the mystery. They interviewed elders, gathered folklore, and even set out to walk through the deserted site. Their notes described an uncanny silence, so thick it felt unnatural. Birds that filled the rest of the forest seemed to avoid the place. At night, they reported hearing drumming in the distance, rhythmic and unbroken, though no one was ever found playing it. Their findings, however, only raised more questions. Among their records was the account of a woman who had been a child when the village still thrived. She had moved away to marry in a different settlement before the disappearance. According to her, the elders of her village had received warnings in dreams, visions of a punishment that would come if an ancient boundary stone was disturbed. She claimed that weeks before the vanishing, children had been seen playing around that very stone, knocking it over in their games. The suggestion that a single act of carelessness had unleashed a curse became part of the local lore. For some, it explained everything. For others, it was too convenient. Meanwhile, outside the communities, Western researchers began to take interest. Reports reached newspapers in nearby cities, framing the story as a mass migration with no evidence. Some suggested economic reasons, such as drought or famine, though none were recorded in the area at the time. A few speculated about human trafficking or forced labor, though again no proof supported this. The lack of answers only magnified the mystery. If the people had fled willingly, why leave their food and tools behind? If they had been taken by force, why was there no struggle? And if the folklore was true, what kind of unseen force could erase hundreds of lives without leaving a trace? As the debate grew, the villagers who lived nearest to the ruins began to speak less about it. For them, it was no longer just a story, but a burden. Some believed speaking of the lost community invited the same fate. Others believed silence was a form of respect for those who had vanished. By the early 1970s, the site was nearly forgotten by outsiders, dismissed as exaggeration. Yet for the locals, the fear remained, passed quietly through generations. It was not just a village that had disappeared. It was trust in safety, trust in the land, trust in what was seen and unseen. The truth of the vanished people was still unanswered. And the forest, holding its secrets, waited. Decades passed, and the story of the vanishing village became a distant echo. For many, it was just another folk tale, a story told around fires to children who barely believed it. But the elders remembered differently. They carried the memory of friends and family who had simply ceased to exist, and for them, the mystery was not a story. It was a scar that refused to heal. By the late 20th century, modern scholars and archaeologists revisited the site with better tools and broader perspectives. They found no mass graves, no hidden trails, no sign of where the people had gone. What they found instead were faint carvings on some of the abandoned walls, symbols that spoke of protection, balance, and harmony with the unseen. These markings suggested that the villagers had always lived with an awareness of forces that could not be easily explained. One researcher proposed that the carvings represented warnings. Another believed they were prayers, meant to shield the people from what eventually overcame them. But none could say for certain what had happened. Every new discovery only seemed to deepen the mystery. Meanwhile, locals still told the tale with reverence. Parents warned their children not to mock or disturb sacred places, reminding them of the vanished people. Hunters who passed near the forest would leave small offerings, water, food, or a coin, at its edge, as if asking for permission to cross safely. The land had become a symbol of humility, a reminder that not everything in life can be controlled or explained. And in a strange way, the disappearance taught a lesson stronger than any resolution could have. It reminded people that life is fragile, that human existence is intertwined with forces greater than themselves. Whether one believed in curses, migration, or some hidden tragedy, the truth remained that an entire community had once lived, loved, and then vanished without a trace. For those who carried the story forward, the moral became clear: respect the unseen, value the present, and never take safety for granted. The vanished village of 1957 was not just about loss, it was about remembrance. Its silence was not empty. It spoke of caution, humility, and the mystery that still surrounds human life. To this day, the land where the village once stood remains untouched. No new settlement has dared to rise there. The trees have grown taller, the grass thicker, and the earth quieter. Some believe the people of the village still walk those paths in another realm, forever connected to the soil they once called home. And so, the mystery endures. A vanishing without explanation, a silence heavier than words, a reminder that history is not only about what we know, it is also about what we may never understand.